The morning sun blazed mercilessly over Tombstone, Arizona territory, casting harsh shadows across the dusty main street. Sarah McKenzie adjusted her wide-brimmed hat as she stepped down from her father's wagon, her boots clicking against the wooden planks of the boardwalk. At 26, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had spent her life managing a cattle ranch alongside her father. But today something felt different. An unsettling tension hung in the desert air like the calm before a monsoon. "I'll be quick, Papa," she called over her shoulder to the weathered man holding the reins. "Just need to make the deposit and collect the deed papers for the north pasture." Thomas Mackenzie nodded, his steel-grey eyes scanning the street with the wariness of a man who had survived Apache raids, cattle rustlers, and the harsh realities of frontier life. "Don't linger, Sarah. Something's got the horses spooked today, and when animals sense trouble, we'd best listen." Sarah pushed through the heavy oak doors of the First National Bank, the cool interior providing temporary relief from the scorching heat. The familiar smell of leather, ink, and old paper greeted her as she approached the teller's window. Behind the iron bars, Clerk Morton Henley looked up nervously, his usually steady hands trembling as he sorted through currency. "Morning, Miss Mackenzie," he stuttered, glancing repeatedly toward the front entrance. "Here for the usual deposit?" "That's right, Morton. Also need those property papers Mr. Fitzgerald promised." She counted out the bills from her leather purse, noting how the clerk's face had grown pale. "Are you feeling well? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Morton could respond, the bank doors exploded inward with a thunderous crash. 3 men in black dusters stormed inside, bandanas covering their faces, Colt .45s drawn and gleaming in the filtered sunlight. The leader, a tall man with cold blue eyes above his mask, fired a shot into the ceiling, sending chunks of plaster raining down. "Everyone on the ground. Now!" His voice cut through the air like a whip. "This is a robbery, and the first person to move wrong gets buried today." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she dropped to her knees beside the other customers, an elderly Mexican woman clutching her rosary, a young prospector with dirt still caked under his fingernails, and the town's minister, Reverend Hayes, who had gone white as Sunday sheets. Morton's hands shot up immediately, bills scattering across the floor behind the counter. "You!" The leader pointed his weapon at the bank manager, Albert Fitzgerald, who had emerged from his office. "Open the vault, and don't even think about triggering any alarms, or these good people will pay the price." Fitzgerald, a portly man in his 50s, nodded frantically and fumbled with his keyring. His hands shook so violently it took 3 attempts to insert the key into the vault's massive lock. The tumblers clicked and groaned as the heavy steel door swung open, revealing stacks of gold coins, currency bundles, and document boxes within. "Inside, all of you." The second outlaw, younger but equally vicious, gestured with his rifle toward the vault. "Move." As they were herded into the cramped space, Sarah caught a glimpse through the bank's front window. Her father still sat in the wagon, but now his rifle lay across his lap, and his jaw was set in that familiar expression of barely controlled fury. She wanted to signal him to ride for help, but the third outlaw had positioned himself as a lookout, scanning the street with predatory intensity. The vault door clanged shut behind them, plunging them into near darkness save for a single oil lamp hanging from a hook. The space, designed to hold wealth and important documents, now held 6 terrified people pressed together in the suffocating confines. The elderly woman began whimpering prayers in Spanish, while the prospector cursed under his breath. "What do they want?" whispered Reverend Hayes, his usual commanding presence reduced to fearful confusion. "Money, obviously," Sarah replied, though her mind was already working through possibilities. She had heard the stories. Bank robberies in these parts often ended badly for witnesses. But why lock us in here? Usually they'd just take what they want and ride out. Through the vault's thick walls, they could hear muffled shouts and the scraping of chairs being moved. It sounded like the outlaws were settling in for more than a quick robbery. Time stretched agonizingly as the air grew thicker and hotter. Sarah pressed her ear against the cold steel, trying to decipher the sounds outside. Then came the distinctive crack of rifles and the thunder of horses' hooves in the street. Shouts erupted from multiple directions, men's voices she recognized as belonging to townspeople, mixed with the harsh commands of the outlaws. A full confrontation had begun, and they were trapped in the middle of it. "They're not just robbing the bank," Sarah realized with growing dread. "They're using us as hostages to hold off a posse." As if summoned by her words, the vault door suddenly groaned, and a sliver of light appeared. But instead of seeing one of the outlaws, Sarah found herself staring into the darkest brown eyes she had ever seen. The man outside the vault was not wearing a black duster or bandana. His long black hair was tied back with leather cord, his bronzed skin marked with traditional Apache tattoos along his jawline, and he wore buckskin pants with a simple cotton shirt. Most striking of all, he held no weapon pointed at them. "Do not be afraid," he said in accented but clear English, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the chaos erupting around them. "I am not with them." The others shrank back in terror. To them, an Apache in Tombstone could only mean death. But Sarah found herself stepping forward, something in his manner compelling her to trust rather than fear. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "My name is Aiyana," he replied, glancing back toward the main banking area where gunshots continued to echo. "And I am here to get you out before this becomes a bloodbath." 3 hours earlier, Aiyana had crouched behind a cluster of barrel cacti on the ridge overlooking Tombstone, his keen eyes studying the movements in the town below. The wanted poster in his saddlebag bore his likeness and the words, "Murder, 500 reward," in bold letters. But the Apache warrior knew the truth was far different from what the territorial authorities believed. 2 weeks ago, he had been tracking the same 3 outlaws now holding the bank hostage, the Dalton brothers, and their associate, Knife McCarty. They had murdered a cavalry patrol near Fort Huachuca and left evidence pointing to Apache raiders, knowing the military would blame his people and increase pressure on the reservations. Aiyana had witnessed the real massacre while hunting elk, but when he tried to report what he had seen to the fort commander, he had been arrested instead. The soldiers had found him with a cavalry saber he had retrieved from the scene as evidence, and that was enough to condemn him in their eyes. He had escaped during transport to the territorial prison, but now every lawman and bounty hunter in Arizona was searching for the murdering Apache who had supposedly killed 5 soldiers. The irony burned like acid in his throat. He was being hunted for trying to prevent the very war the real killers wanted to start. Aiyana's horse, a paint stallion named Takoda, stamped restlessly behind him as gunshots echoed from the town. Through his brass army field glasses, taken from one of the dead soldiers, he had watched the Dalton brothers enter the bank with McCarty. He had also seen the growing crowd of armed townspeople gathering in the street, and he knew this situation would end in bloodshed unless someone acted. The logical choice was to ride away. Every minute he spent near Tombstone increased his chances of being recognized and captured. But when he had seen the bank customers being forced into the vault, including a young woman with auburn hair who carried herself with remarkable composure even in terror, something had shifted in his chest. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. A warrior's strength is measured not by who he can defeat, but by who he chooses to protect. He had left Takoda hidden in an arroyo a quarter-mile from town and approached on foot, using skills learned from a lifetime of tracking game and avoiding cavalry patrols. The chaos in the street provided perfect cover as he slipped between buildings, moving like a shadow despite the bright afternoon sun. The back of the bank had a single window, barred but not locked. Aiyana had squeezed through gaps barely wide enough for his lean frame, emerging behind the teller counter, just as the 3 outlaws were arguing about their next move. "Posse's growing out there, Jake," McCarty was saying, his nervous energy making him pace like a caged wolf. "Maybe we should cut our losses and ride out the back." "Shut up and watch that door," Jake Dalton snapped. He was clearly the leader, his cold intelligence evident in how he had positioned his men and controlled the situation. "We stick to the plan. They won't risk storming the place with hostages inside." "What about the Apache patrol rumored to be in these parts?" asked Billy Dalton, the youngest brother, barely old enough to grow a proper mustache. "If they show up looking for revenge?" Jake's harsh laugh filled the banking hall. "Perfect. Let the Red Devils come. We'll blame this whole mess on them too. Dead Apache can't tell their side of the story." The casual cruelty in his words confirmed what Aiyana already knew. These men had no intention of leaving witnesses. They would rob the bank, kill everyone inside, and disappear while Apache warriors faced the consequences. It was a pattern he had seen before, and one that would only escalate the growing tensions between his people and the white settlers. Moving with practiced silence, Aiyana had approached the vault door while the outlaws were distracted by increasing activity in the street. The massive lock was beyond his skills, but Jake Dalton had left it slightly ajar, overconfident that 6 terrified people posed no threat locked inside a steel box. Now, as he looked into the frightened faces of the hostages, Aiyana felt the weight of his decision. Helping them would likely mean sacrificing his own freedom, possibly his life. But he had learned from his Apache elders that some choices defined a man's character more than a lifetime of smaller decisions. "You're Apache," the elderly Mexican woman whispered, crossing herself. "Dios mío." "I am," Aiyana replied quietly, "but I am not your enemy. The men holding you hostage killed cavalry soldiers and blamed my people for it. If I do not act, you will all die, and my tribe will be punished for murders we did not commit." The young woman with auburn hair stepped closer, studying his face with startling intensity. "You're the one they're hunting, the wanted man." It wasn't a question. Aiyana nodded. "My name is Aiyana, and yes, they hunt me for crimes I did not commit. But that does not matter now. What matters is getting you away from here safely." "How?" asked the bank manager, Fitzgerald, his voice cracking. "There are 3 of them, all armed, and a posse outside ready to shoot anything that moves." Before Aiyana could answer, Jake Dalton's voice boomed from the main banking area. "You in the vault, we know you can hear us. One of you is coming out to deliver a message to that posse. Tell them we want safe passage to the Mexican border, or we start shooting hostages every hour until they agree." The steel door began to swing shut again, but Aiyana caught it with his shoulder, muscles straining against the weight. "Wait," he whispered urgently to the hostages. "There is another way. The bank's foundation connects to old mine tunnels beneath the town. If we can reach them—" "The Silver Queen Mine," Sarah McKenzie breathed, understanding immediately. "It connects to half the buildings on this side of Main Street, but the entrance is through the bank's basement storage room," Fitzgerald finished. "But we'd have to get past those killers to reach it." Heavy footsteps approached the vault. "Time's up." Jake Dalton's voice was closer now. "Send out the pretty lady. She can deliver our message real effective-like." Aiyana's jaw tightened. He had heard that tone before, predatory, calculating. Men like Dalton didn't just kill for money. They enjoyed the power, the fear, the control over others' lives. In his experience, such men never honored their promises, especially to women. "No," he said firmly, positioning himself between the hostages and the opening vault door. "No one goes with them." The door swung open fully, revealing Jake Dalton with his Colt drawn. His eyes widened in shock when he saw Aiyana, then narrowed with vicious recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," Dalton smiled coldly. "The murdering Apache, right here in my robbery. Boys, our luck just got even better. We can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, rob the bank and collect that bounty." But Aiyana was already moving, his hand closing around a heavy brass paperweight from Fitzgerald's desk as Jake raised his weapon. The next few seconds would determine whether anyone in that vault lived to see another sunset. The brass paperweight flew from Aiyana's hand with deadly precision, striking Jake Dalton's gun arm just as the outlaw pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, the bullet embedding in the vault's steel wall with a deafening clang that rang through the banking hall like a church bell. Dalton cursed and staggered backward, his Colt clattering across the wooden floor. "Billy, McCarty!" Jake roared, clutching his wounded arm. "We got the Apache. He's in the vault." Aiyana didn't wait for the other outlaws to respond. He lunged forward, tackling Jake around the waist and driving both men to the floor. They rolled across the polished boards, grappling for control as boots thundered from different directions. Jake was strong and vicious, fighting with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. But Aiyana had been trained by Apache warriors who viewed combat as both art and survival. "The basement!" Aiyana shouted over his shoulder to the hostages still cowering in the vault. "Fitzgerald, show them the way down!" Sarah McKenzie needed no further encouragement. While the 2 men fought, she grabbed the oil lamp from the vault wall and helped the elderly Mexican woman to her feet. "Come on, everyone, move!" Fitzgerald, his banking instincts overriding his fear, snatched a ring of keys from his desk drawer. "This way, quickly!" He led the group toward a narrow door marked Storage in the corner of the banking hall, fumbling with the keys as Billy Dalton and McCarty burst into the main room. "There!" Billy pointed his rifle toward the struggling figures on the floor. "Shoot the Apache!" But the 2 men were locked together, rolling and twisting so violently that Billy couldn't get a clear shot without risking his brother's life. McCarty, meanwhile, spotted the fleeing hostages and swung his weapon toward them. "They're getting away!" The crack of his rifle split the air and the storage door frame exploded in splinters inches from Sarah's head. She didn't flinch, instead pushing the elderly woman through the doorway while Reverend Hayes and the prospector scrambled after them. Aiyana heard the shot and felt Jake's grip loosen for just an instant. He drove his elbow into the outlaw's solar plexus, then rolled away as Jake gasped for breath. In one fluid motion, Aiyana scooped up Jake's fallen Colt and dove behind the heavy banker's desk as McCarty fired again. "Basement stairs!" Fitzgerald's voice echoed from below. "Hurry!" Sarah was the last of the hostages still in the main hall, the oil lamp flickering in her grip as she waited at the storage door. "Aiyana! Come on!" He fired twice over the desktop, not aiming to kill, but to keep Billy and McCarty pinned behind the teller counter. Jake was getting to his feet, his face twisted with rage and pain, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. "You think you can play hero, Apache?" Jake snarled, drawing a second pistol from his belt. "You just signed all their death warrants." "The only death warrant here is yours," Aiyana replied, his voice deadly calm. "For the cavalry patrol you murdered, for framing my people." Jake's cold smile faltered for just a moment. "Prove it." "I was there. I saw everything." The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Billy Dalton's eyes widened, and even McCarty stopped firing for a moment. They had been so careful, so sure their plan was perfect. "Doesn't matter what you saw," Jake recovered quickly. "Dead men tell no tales, and you're about to be very dead." But as Jake raised his second gun, the front windows of the bank suddenly exploded inward in a shower of glass and wooden fragments. The posse outside had finally lost patience with waiting. Sheriff Morrison's voice boomed through the chaos. "This is your last warning. Release the hostages and surrender, or we're coming in." The distraction was exactly what Aiyana needed. He vaulted over the desk, sprinting toward the storage room as bullets whined past his ears from 3 different directions. Sarah grabbed his arm as he reached the doorway, pulling him into the narrow stairwell, just as the front door splintered under the impact of rifle butts and boot heels. "Down here!" Fitzgerald's voice called from the darkness below. "The tunnel entrance is behind the old wine barrels." They descended rapidly, Sarah's lamp casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. The basement smelled of dust, dampness, and old leather from document storage boxes. In the far corner, barely visible in the flickering light, stood a collection of wooden barrels that had once stored wine for the bank's previous owner. Above them, the sound of full combat erupted as the posse stormed the banking hall. Gunshots cracked like thunder, men shouted orders and curses, and furniture crashed to the floor. But Aiyana knew the real danger was still to come. Jake Dalton was wounded but not beaten, and he would pursue them with the relentless fury of a man with nothing left to lose. "Here," Fitzgerald gasped, rolling one of the heavy barrels aside to reveal a gap in the stone foundation. "This connects to the Silver Queen's main shaft. From there, you can reach tunnels that lead outside town." "What about you?" Sarah asked, though she could see the answer in the older man's exhausted face. "You can't make it through these tunnels." "I'll be fine. I know places to hide down here until this is over." Fitzgerald pressed a small leather pouch into her hands. "Emergency fund, take it. You'll need supplies if you're running with him." Sarah looked at Aiyana in the lamplight, seeing him clearly for the first time. His face was lean and strong, marked by hardship, but not cruel. His dark eyes held intelligence and integrity, not the savage madness the wanted posters described. Blood from a cut on his cheek made him look dangerous, but his careful concern for the other hostages revealed his true character. "Why are you helping us?" she asked quietly. "You could have escaped already." "Because innocent people should not die for other men's crimes," he replied, "and because you trusted me when others would not." The sound of heavy boots on the basement stairs cut off any further conversation. Jake Dalton's voice echoed down the stone walls. "I know you're down there, Apache. You and that pretty little rancher girl. Come on up, and maybe I'll make it quick." Aiyana checked the bullets remaining in Jake's pistol. 3 rounds. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but possibly enough to buy time. He looked at Sarah, seeing determination rather than fear in her green eyes. "Can you handle yourself in those tunnels?" "I've been exploring caves since I was 12, she replied. "Lead the way." As they squeezed through the narrow opening into the mine tunnel beyond, Sarah heard her father's voice joining the chaos upstairs. Thomas McKenzie had clearly joined the posse, and his deep roar of "Where's my daughter?" carried the promise of violence that made even battle-hardened outlaws step carefully. The tunnel stretched ahead into absolute darkness, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Behind them, Jake Dalton's boots reached the basement floor, and his voice carried the promise of death. "I'm coming for you, Apache, and when I catch you, I'm going to make you watch while I show that rancher girl what real men do to women who choose the wrong side." Sarah's jaw tightened at the threat, but Aiyana simply took her hand in the darkness. "He will not touch you," he said quietly. "I promise you this." As they moved deeper into the labyrinth beneath Tombstone, Sarah found herself believing him completely. The mine tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, its walls narrowing and widening unpredictably, as Sarah and Aiyana moved through the suffocating darkness. The oil lamp cast a weak circle of yellow light that seemed to be swallowed by the ancient stone around them. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above, creating an echo that made it impossible to tell if the footsteps they heard behind them were Jake Dalton's boots or merely the sound of their own movement bouncing off the tunnel walls. Sarah's practical ranch dress, designed for town visits rather than underground exploration, caught on protruding rocks and wooden support beams. Sweat dampened her blouse despite the cool air in the tunnels, and she could taste dust with every breath. But she pressed forward without complaint, matching Aiyana's steady pace. "How well do you know these tunnels?" Aiyana asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well enough," Sarah replied, though uncertainty colored her tone. "I used to explore them with my brother before he died in the war, but that was 8 years ago and cave-ins changed the layout. Some passages that used to connect might be blocked now." They reached a junction where 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. Sarah held the lamp high, studying the walls for familiar markings. Miners had carved symbols and initials into the stone, creating a crude but effective navigation system for those who knew how to read it. "This way," she decided, pointing to the leftmost passage. "It should lead toward the north edge of town, near Boot Hill Cemetery." As they entered the new tunnel, Aiyana suddenly stopped, his hand gripping Sarah's wrist gently but firmly. In the silence, they could hear voices echoing from the direction they had come, not just Jake Dalton, but at least 2 other men. "He brought help," Sarah whispered. "Billy and McCarty," Aiyana confirmed. "They must have escaped during the gunfight with the posse." The voices were growing closer, and Sarah could make out Jake's harsh tone. "Check every branch. They can't have gotten far with just one lamp." Aiyana examined their surroundings carefully. The tunnel ahead continued straight for about 50 yards before disappearing around a bend, but to their right a smaller opening led into what appeared to be a natural cave formation rather than a man-made passage. "Can you put out the lamp?" he asked. Sarah's eyes widened. "In complete darkness. We'll be blind. So will they. But I know how to move without light. It is part of Apache training. Trust me." The word trust hung between them like a bridge. Sarah had been raised to fear and distrust Apache warriors, taught they were savage killers who showed no mercy to white settlers. Yet this man had risked everything to save her and the other hostages, asking nothing in return except the chance to clear his name. She blew out the lamp. Absolute darkness enveloped them, so complete that Sarah couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. Panic fluttered in her chest, but then she felt Aiyana's warm palm against hers, steady and reassuring. "Close your eyes," he whispered directly into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Listen to your other senses, feel the air movement, smell the different scents, hear the sounds of water and stone." Following his guidance, Sarah found herself becoming aware of details she had missed while depending on sight. The air in the natural cave carried a different scent, earthier, with hints of mineral deposits. A slight breeze suggested another opening somewhere ahead. The sound of their pursuers' voices grew louder, but seemed to be continuing straight down the main tunnel. Moving with incredible care, Aiyana guided her into the natural cave, his moccasins making no sound on the stone floor. Sarah tried to match his silent movement, grateful for the soft leather soles of her town boots. They progressed slowly, Aiyana's hand occasionally pressing gently on her shoulder to warn her of low-hanging rocks or changes in elevation. Behind them, Jake's voice echoed with growing frustration. "Where the hell are they? This tunnel's got to end somewhere." "Maybe they doubled back," suggested Billy's younger voice. "Or maybe they know these mines better than we thought," McCarty added nervously. "Jake, we should get out of here. That posse's going to search these tunnels eventually." "We're not leaving without that Apache," Jake snarled. "He's the only witness to what really happened at the fort. And I want that rancher girl too. Her daddy's rich and she'll bring a good price across the Mexican border." Sarah's blood ran cold at his words, but she forced herself to keep moving. Ahead, the cave began to slope upward, and the breeze grew stronger. Aiyana stopped suddenly and she felt him turn toward her in the darkness. "There is light ahead," he whispered. "Natural light. We are close to another entrance." Indeed, as her eyes adjusted, Sarah could make out the faintest grey glow reflecting off the cave walls somewhere ahead of them. It wasn't much, but after the absolute darkness, it seemed bright as day. They emerged from the cave into late afternoon sunlight, blinking like owls as their eyes struggled to adapt. They stood on a rocky ledge overlooking a narrow arroyo about half a mile north of Tombstone. In the distance, Sarah could see the rooftops and church steeple of the town, and beyond that, smoke rising from what was probably the bank where the gun battle had taken place. "My horse is hidden nearby," Aiyana said, scanning the landscape. "But we need supplies. Water, food, ammunition. They will search every inch of this territory now." Sarah nodded, her practical rancher's mind already working through the logistics. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles north of here, near Skeleton Creek. My father used it during roundups, but it's been abandoned for 2 years. We could rest there, plan our next move." "Our next move?" Aiyana studied her face carefully. "You do not have to run with me, Sarah McKenzie. Your father will protect you, and once I am gone, you will be safe." "Safe?" Sarah's green eyes flashed with sudden anger. "You heard what Jake Dalton said. I'm a witness now, too. Even if you disappear, he knows I can identify him and his men. And besides," she paused, surprised by her own words, "I want to help you prove your innocence. What happened to that cavalry patrol was wrong, and letting your people take the blame would be worse." Aiyana felt something shift in his chest at her declaration. In his 27 years, he had encountered very few white settlers who saw past his Apache heritage to the man underneath. Most viewed him as either a savage to be feared or an animal to be used. But Sarah looked at him as simply a human being in need of help, and that recognition stirred emotions he had thought buried forever. "It will be dangerous," he warned. "We would be outlaws together. You for helping me for crimes I did not commit. Your life in Tombstone would be over." Sarah thought of her comfortable ranch house, her father's protection, the secure life she had always known. Then she thought of the contempt in Jake Dalton's voice, the casual way he had spoken of murdering innocent people, and the growing tensions between Apache communities and white settlers that men like him deliberately fueled for their own profit. "Some things are more important than safety," she said finally. "My mother used to say that character is revealed not by what we do when it's easy, but by what we do when it costs us everything." From the cave behind them came the distant sound of voices. Jake and his men had found the entrance. They had perhaps 10 minutes before being discovered. "Then we ride together," Aiyana said, offering her his hand. "But first, we survive today." As they climbed down from the ledge toward the arroyo where his horse waited, Sarah realized she had just made a decision that would change her life forever. She was no longer just a rancher's daughter caught in someone else's fight. She had chosen her side in a conflict much larger than a simple bank robbery, and there would be no going back. Behind them, Jake Dalton's voice echoed from the cave entrance. "There, I can see sunlight. They went this way." The hunt was far from over, but now Sarah and Aiyana faced it together. 3 days later, Sarah crouched beside Aiyana behind a cluster of prickly pear cacti, watching the abandoned cavalry patrol camp through his field glasses. The site where the murders had taken place lay in a natural basin surrounded by red rock formations, perhaps 2 miles from Fort Huachuca. Buzzards still circled overhead, though the bodies had long since been removed by military recovery teams. "There," Aiyana pointed to a large boulder near what had been the patrol's fire pit. "Behind that rock is where I hid when I heard the gunshots. I watched everything from there." Sarah studied the terrain, her analytical mind working through the details Aiyana had shared during their journey to this place. The line shack had provided temporary shelter, but they both knew their only hope lay in finding physical evidence that would prove Jake Dalton and his men were the real killers. "You said Jake took a cavalry saber as a trophy." "Yes, the sergeant's saber. It had engravings on the blade, family name and regiment number. Jake examined it closely before deciding to leave it behind with my tracks nearby." "And you're certain he was wounded during the attack?" Aiyana nodded grimly. "The sergeant fought hard before he died. His saber cut deep into Jake's left shoulder. There was much blood." Sarah lowered the glasses, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. "Then we might still find evidence. Blood doesn't wash away easily from desert rock, and if Jake dropped anything—" A distant sound made them both freeze, horses approaching from the north. Through the shimmering heat waves, they could see a dust cloud rising from the direction of the fort. A cavalry patrol was returning to investigate the scene, just as Aiyana had predicted they would. "How many?" Sarah whispered. 8 riders. And one of them—" Aiyana's eyes narrowed as he studied the approaching figures. "Lieutenant Morrison. He was the officer who arrested me." Sarah felt her stomach clench. Lieutenant Morrison was Sheriff Morrison's younger brother, and both men had reputations for shoot-first justice when it came to Apache suspects. If they were spotted here, there would be no opportunity to explain or present evidence. But as the patrol drew closer, Sarah noticed something that changed everything. Riding with the soldiers, his hands bound but still in the saddle, was a familiar figure in a black duster. "Jake Dalton," she breathed. "They caught him." Aiyana took the glasses, studying the group intently. "He is wounded. His left arm is in a sling, and there is fresh blood on his shirt." "But why would they bring him here?" Their question was answered as the patrol reached the old campsite and Lieutenant Morrison dismounted. His voice carried clearly in the desert air as he addressed his prisoner. "All right, Dalton. You claim you have information about the Apache who killed my men. This is where it happened. Start talking." Jake's reply was confident, even cocky. "Like I told you, Lieutenant, I saw the whole thing. I was tracking stolen cattle when I heard the shooting. By the time I got close enough to see what was happening, that Apache warrior was finishing off your sergeant with his own saber. And you did nothing to help. 8 against 1, and him already wounded. I'm not stupid, Lieutenant. I waited until he left, then followed his trail back toward the reservation. That's how I know it was the one they call Aiyana." Sarah felt Aiyana tense beside her. Jake's story was smooth and believable, mixing just enough truth to make the lies convincing. But she had noticed something the outlaw hadn't. In his wounded condition, he was making mistakes. "Listen," she whispered urgently. "He just said he was tracking stolen cattle, but 3 days ago at the bank, he was planning a robbery. Why would a cattle rustler suddenly decide to rob a bank unless he needed money quickly to leave the territory?" Aiyana finished, understanding immediately. Because someone was getting close to the truth about the patrol murders. Below them, Lieutenant Morrison was examining the scene with military precision, but Sarah could see he was finding exactly what Jake wanted him to find, evidence carefully planted to implicate Aiyana. Her mind raced, remembering something her father had taught her about reading sign and tracking. "The blood," she said suddenly. "Jake bled here during the fight, but he also bled at the bank when you hit his arm. If it's the same wound..." Aiyana's eyes lit with understanding. "The wound would have torn open again during our fight, fresh bleeding on an old injury. Can you get to that boulder where you hid? The one where you saw him examine the saber?" "Yes, but it means moving closer to the patrol." "Do it. I have an idea, but I need you to create a distraction." Without waiting for his response, Sarah began working her way around the basin, using the natural rock formations for cover. Her plan was dangerous, probably foolish, but it was their only chance to prevent Jake Dalton from successfully framing an innocent man for mass murder. 20 minutes later, Aiyana appeared briefly on the ridge above the boulder where he had hidden during the real attack. He didn't need to expose himself for long, just enough for the sharp-eyed cavalry soldiers to spot movement and react. "There!" Lieutenant Morrison shouted, pointing toward the ridge. "Hey, Apache on the north rim." The patrol exploded into action, soldiers grabbing rifles and spreading out to surround the position. In the confusion, nobody noticed the young woman in a torn ranch dress approaching their horses from the opposite direction. Sarah had one chance. Jake Dalton's horse stood slightly apart from the military mounts, and she could see his saddlebags hanging loose. If her theory was right, if Jake was arrogant enough to keep trophies from his crimes. Her fingers found the leather flap and slipped inside, feeling around desperately. Extra ammunition, jerky, a flask of whiskey, and then her hand closed around cold metal. She pulled out a cavalry saber, its blade etched with ornate engravings and dark stains that could only be dried blood. "Sergeant William Hayes, 4th Cavalry Regiment," she read from the blade's inscription, her heart hammering. "Looking for something, Miss McKenzie?" Sarah spun around to find Jake Dalton behind her, his good arm holding a concealed derringer pointed at her chest. His wounded left arm hung useless in its makeshift sling, but his eyes burned with the cold fury of a cornered predator. "Thought you were clever, didn't you?" he sneered. "Following us here, trying to prove that Apache's innocence. Too bad nobody's going to believe the word of a woman who ran off with a savage." "They'll believe this." Sarah held up the blood-stained saber. "Sergeant Hayes's saber, with his name engraved right on the blade. The same saber you used to kill him and his men." Jake's smile was deadly. "My word against yours, little lady. And you're forgetting, I'm the one who reported the Apache. Why would I do that if I was guilty?" "Because you needed a scapegoat," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "You and your brothers have been planning this for months. Kill a cavalry patrol, blame the Apache, let the army pressure them back onto smaller reservations while you move stolen cattle through the territory. The bank robbery was just supposed to be your final score before disappearing to Mexico." For a moment, Jake's mask of confidence slipped, revealing surprise at how much she had figured out. But then his cold smile returned. "Smart girl. Too smart for your own good." The derringer was rising toward her face when a rifle shot cracked across the desert. Jake Dalton jerked sideways, the small pistol flying from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Behind him, Lieutenant Morrison stood with his smoking carbine, his face grim with understanding. "I heard every word," Morrison said coldly, "and I've been wondering why a man tracking stolen cattle would be carrying a cavalry saber with Sergeant Hayes's blood still on it." The rest of the patrol had returned from their fruitless chase of Aiyana, and now they formed a circle around the wounded outlaw. Jake clutched his shoulder, fresh blood seeping through his shirt from Morrison's bullet. "You can't prove anything," he snarled. "It's still my word against theirs." "Actually," a new voice said from the ridge above, "it is your word against mine." Everyone looked up to see Aiyana standing in plain sight, no longer hiding. In his hands he held a small leather journal. "I found this near the boulder where you examined the sergeant's saber 3 weeks ago," he called down. "You dropped it during the fight. It contains detailed notes about patrol schedules, army payroll transfers, and plans for moving stolen cattle. All in your handwriting." Jake's face went white as Aiyana climbed down into the basin. The Apache warrior moved with calm dignity, showing no fear despite being surrounded by the same soldiers who had hunted him as a murderer. Lieutenant Morrison accepted the journal, scanning its contents with growing amazement. Patrol routes, supply schedules, troop movements. "This is detailed intelligence gathering. How long have you been planning this?" "Long enough," Jake muttered, then seemed to realize what he had admitted. "James Dalton," Lieutenant Morrison said formally, "I arrest you for the murder of Sergeant William Hayes and 7 members of his patrol, for conspiracy against the United States Army, and for the theft of government property." As the soldiers bound Jake's hands, he looked directly at Sarah with pure hatred. "This isn't over, girl. My brothers are still free, and they don't forget." "Your brothers are dead," Lieutenant Morrison informed him coldly. "Both killed yesterday while resisting arrest in Tucson. You're the last of the Dalton gang." The news hit Jake like a physical blow, and for the first time, Sarah saw real fear in his eyes. Without his brothers, without his gang, he was just one man facing the gallows for multiple murders. "Aiyana," Lieutenant Morrison turned to the Apache warrior, "I owe you an apology, and my thanks. Without your testimony, we might never have learned the truth about this conspiracy." "I ask for no thanks," Aiyana replied quietly. "Only that the truth be known so my people are not blamed for crimes we did not commit." As the patrol prepared to escort their prisoner back to Fort Huachuca, Lieutenant Morrison approached Sarah. "Miss McKenzie, your father is worried sick. Half the territory is looking for you." Sarah nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the past 3 days. "I'll come back to Tombstone with you. But I want it known that Aiyana saved my life, and the lives of everyone in that bank. Without his courage, Jake Dalton would have killed us all and blamed it on Apache raiders." The ride back to Tombstone took most of the day, and as they approached the town in the gathering dusk, Sarah could see a large crowd waiting in the main street. Her father sat his horse at the front of the group, his weathered face showing the strain of 3 days of desperate searching. When Thomas McKenzie saw his daughter alive and unharmed, tears streamed down his cheeks. The first time Sarah had seen him cry since her mother's death, but his expression grew complicated when he noticed Aiyana riding beside the patrol. "Papa," Sarah said as she dismounted, "this is Aiyana. He saved my life and helped expose the real murderers of that cavalry patrol." Thomas studied the Apache warrior for a long moment, taking in his quiet dignity and the respectful distance he maintained. "You brought my daughter back safely," he said finally. "That makes you welcome at the McKenzie ranch." A murmur ran through the crowd, some approving, others clearly uncomfortable with a white rancher offering hospitality to an Apache. But Sarah noticed that several of the former bank hostages pushed forward to shake Aiyana's hand and thank him personally. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked Aiyana as the crowd began to disperse. "Return to my people," he replied. "Tell them that justice can still be found, even when it seems impossible, and perhaps visit friends who have shown that not all barriers between our peoples are permanent." He looked directly at her as he spoke the last words, and Sarah felt her heart race with possibilities she had never imagined just a week ago. As Aiyana rode toward the desert under a canopy of brilliant stars, Sarah McKenzie stood watching until his silhouette disappeared into the darkness. She had begun this adventure as a sheltered rancher's daughter, but she was ending it as a woman who had seen beyond the prejudices of her upbringing to discover the true measure of a man's character. The Wild West was changing, and people like Sarah and Aiyana were proof that courage and justice could bridge even the deepest divides if someone was willing to risk everything for what was right. 6 months later, when Apache delegations came to Tombstone for treaty negotiations, Sarah McKenzie was there to welcome them. And among the warriors who rode with the peace delegation was a familiar figure whose dark eyes still held the memory of a shared adventure that had changed 2 lives forever.